Hey folks, Mary Lou. Today what I am doing is roasting some whole chickens. I pulled these out of the freezer a little while ago to start defrosting. These are chickens we have raised, some of our spare roosters, and they are currently packaged in these little shrink wrap bags, so they look much like if you bought a whole chicken at the grocery store, except they tend to be small because these are our Icelandic roosters and they do not grow to be a very large bird. So these range from 2 to just over 3 pounds normally a piece in weight. So they're very small compared to most grocery store meat birds you would buy. And you do generally need to handle actual like heritage and pasture raised birds slightly differently because these are a much more mature creature. So when you buy a whole chicken at the grocery store, you're basically getting an infant bird. They're usually 6 to 8 weeks old when you butcher a Cornish cross, which is the 4-way hybrid that almost all meat birds in this country are these days. And they're very, very fast growing. 6-week-old chicken is still an infant chicken. Most of them, left to their own devices, would still be with a mother and not be any bigger than like about this big and fluffy and have about 2 bites worth of meat. But they have developed very fast growing birds that get to a very heavy weight very quickly. And so that's the standard meat bird. So these are different. These are more like 5, 6, sometimes even 7 months old by the time they're butchered and get to about the same size. This works for us because they run around the property here eating bugs and grass and leaves and so on. But it also means there is a more mature meat that is not the same texture as an infant meat. So I like to do, because they are small, I like to roast about 4 at a time. It fits nicely in this big old savory roaster. It will hold a large turkey as well, but it tends to very nicely hold 4 of these chickens. It lets me roast them all at once, and then we'll have chicken legs for dinner here after a bit, and probably chicken legs for dinner tomorrow. And then we like the dark meat best, both of us, so then I'll pull all the breast meat off and we'll use that. Sometimes I put some of that once it's cooked back in the freezer, but then we tend to use that for burritos or tacos or chicken sandwiches and so on. So what I'm going to show you here, what I do most of the time, is not hard at all. I do want to heavily salt these. If you're buying a whole bird from the grocery store, you probably do not want to add salt. Almost always, you can look at whatever packaging it came in, but we usually say 10 to 15% of the package weight is salt water already. It helps keep the meat juicy. If you add 15% of your weight is salt water, it makes selling your meat by the pound more profitable, etc. But anyway, it's usually very heavily salted already. So you probably would not want to add any salt. There is no salt in the packaging we did on these, so I am salting plenty. I'm just sprinkling that on liberally, so it's bouncing off into the pan. It'll soak into the meat toward the bottom. But it does help with both the flavor and tenderizing if there is some salt on there. And I'm just using Redmond real salt. That's our favorite. It looks like it's dirty because it has all the minerals in it. It's not refined. And then you could just roast them like that. My favorite mix is to put a poultry seasoning mix of herbs on it. This is just finely ground, but it's poultry seasoning is basically usually rosemary, thyme, sage, savory, a couple of those herbs. And I like the flavor of that. So you could use any one of those herbs individually. It's just handy to have a mixture of them. So I just coat my birds like that. Now I will often add a little bit of water to the bottom of the pan here when these are going to start roasting, because this meat is not necessarily drier. It actually tends to have a really rich yellow fat that you don't get from a grocery store, but I don't want it to dry out while it's getting started roasting. Now I'm going to put the cover on. If you do not have an antique savory roaster, I don't think these have been made in my lifetime, I don't believe. Let's see if I can show you the bottom there. I don't know if the camera can see that. It's shaped kind of like this, and it does provide, in my experience, compared to all other roast pans, a superior roasting experience for almost any kind of meat, whether you're doing a beef roast or a whole chicken or whatever. But if you can't get your hands on one of these, they're only available, as far as I know, from your grandmother, a thrift store, a garage sale, something like that these days. You can do the same kind of thing with any other roast pan, or even with a pan just covered with foil, but you may want to add a little bit more liquid, because more will tend to leak out and evaporate, and the meat's gonna get dry if you do that. Now, the next thing is we're going to do this very low and slow, because a muscle fiber that's actually been worked, used, walked around on, etc. for months instead of a couple weeks has more flavor, more nutrition, and it's a little tougher if you don't cook it low and slow. So what I usually do is put these into the oven at about like 260, 290 degrees. And we're gonna leave them in there for a lot of hours. The way I check when they're done, I'll show you in a bit, when we check on this, is if I grab one of those legs and give it a little twist, and it just wants to fall off the whole bird, then it's tender and done. So now we just are gonna let that go for a long time. The results on this are fabulous. You probably would not be pleased with the results if you took, say, the legs off of these chickens and made them into fried chicken or something like that that's a quick and hot temperature, because of what I just mentioned about the texture differences with dealing with a more mature bird. And so this way we love, they come out juicy, tender, eat them with Christmas cabbage or whatever else we feel like for dinner. And then I know a lot of people prefer chicken breasts. We do not, but then we use that meat up to make sandwiches and so on. For some other ideas, if you also raise chickens, these roosters are a byproduct of having hens that are naturally broody and that raise their own babies. Eventually, you don't need to add 50 additional roosters to your flock every year. If you also have that kind of thing going on, you're not just buying in Cornish cross chicks, raising them for 6 to 8 weeks and then butchering them, because that meat does tend to get handled differently. This book actually has some excellent recipes. The title is also funny. If you look up the reviews on Amazon, you will find that it seems to be equally purchased as a gag gift for friends and as an actual cookbook. But as an actual cookbook, it does have quite a few recipes from around the world for all kinds of ways to cook a more mature rooster that's not an infant rooster. And I haven't even experimented with all of them here yet, but at some point I will, because there's a lot of fun recipes in here. And so if you're not just looking for a gag gift for some friends, but you want to actually get some more of the ways people around the globe have cooked mature birds over time, there are some great recipes in here. So anyway, we're gonna let that go, and in 3 or 4 hours, I'm gonna come back and check on it, and we'll see what they're looking like then. Okay, we are going to check on these chickens in the oven. Pull this out far enough to be able to see it, hopefully. I can tell even without touching them from the way the legs are sprung kind of off the main body that this is done. But if you can't tell that, if I grab this, see the whole chicken leg pulls right off. A little hot, of course. But any one of these, they just pull apart like that. That's done. That's the texture I like my chicken. So we're gonna lift this out. So I know it's kind of dark there in the oven, so hopefully you can see this better. If you can pull a leg free like that, that's the texture that we enjoy our chickens. Now, as I said, there are many other recipes you can use to cook a more mature bird, especially something like this, a heritage free-ranged, rooster. But this is what we do most of the time. Now we're gonna have some chicken legs, probably with Christmas cabbage and potatoes, since we also have lots of cabbage and potatoes coming out of the garden, for our dinner, for a couple meals. And then I will just pull all the breast meat off. And one of our favorite things to do with those is burritos. I think somewhere in one of the cooking videos I did a recipe that showed that, or make a chicken sandwich, or make tacos or make a white bean chicken chili or any of those kinds of things. And then all the carcasses will go in a pot with water and get simmered down for a few days and make wonderful broth. And I wanted to show you, there is some pretty wonderful broth already in here. I don't know if you can see that. The little bit of water I poured in there did start to make some steam, but a lot of beautiful, rich, yellow fat also cooked out of these birds as they were cooking. So that's how, got that leg a little disarranged, that's how I roast chickens. And would you have to do 4 at once? Absolutely not. It's just 4 of these little tiny birds fits really nicely in this roast pan. And so then I only have to, roast them once, and then I have the meat to be able to make all kinds of meals with for the next week. So hopefully that gives you an idea if you have ever had a mature, not an infant bird to actually roast or cook or figure out how you're cooking.
Thank you everyone for watching. It means a lot, and I hope you learned something along the way.
If you know somebody else who would enjoy this as well, share it with them.